I am a parent of 2 teens, and there's always conversation around how all their friends are starting to date. I want them to be able to love with freedom, but I also want to spare them all the pain that comes from not being intellectually mature at such a formative stage of life. You're such a good parent. Do you have any advice? Should I let my teens date as a Christian? You guys, I have what I would consider a pretty spicy opinion on this topic. In order to kind of start this conversation, we need to talk about what adolescent parenting looks like in general, because I think that is the framework. That is one of 2 questions I think frames this entire conversation. The first question is, what does teen parenting look like? What's my role as a parent of the teenager? And the second is, what is dating for? So the first topic is teen parenting and your role in your child's life. So we live in a culture that is very, very quickly trying to strip adolescent parents of any sort of right and responsibility over their teenagers. There are doctor's offices with the transgender stuff going on. There are doctor's offices that won't even let parents have access to their children's medical records from the ages of like 12 or 13 to 17 because the kid needs to be allowed to do whatever they want with their body. And the doctor is in their mind, having the best interest of the child at heart when the parents aren't. So there's this whole topsy-turvy situation going on where teen parents are just like totally invalidated in their ability to guide their teens. And like, even if you as a teen parent know, okay, that's malarkey, there's still this sense of like, but what right do I have? What responsibility do I have? So I think it's important to, first of all, recognize that your teen is not an adult. Adolescence is a very, very precious, sacred time. They go through it once, they will never get it back. It's like childhood. You go through it once it's over, it's done, and you're never getting it back. So adolescence is the same way. You're straddling childhood and adulthood, but you're not an adult yet. You're not a child, right? You're able to take on some responsibility. You're able to do some more adulty things, but you're also not an adult. And so you don't have, not only do you not have the ability to kind of responsibly make some certain decisions, but you also don't have the brain capacity, right? Like, so when we look at neuroscience and we look at neurological development, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of a person's brain responsible for tons of stuff, some of which are decision-making, risk analysis, the ability to look at different things and choose like, okay, this would be a better decision than that one. That is not even fully developed until someone's mid-20s. So a person's brain as an adolescent is still functioning very much like a transitional child brain, right? They're not kids, but they're also not adults. Their prefrontal cortexes are not fully developed. So they don't have the ability to totally understand risk taking, to totally understand the consequences of risk. Additionally, to all of this neuroscience stuff going on in the mind of your teenager, there is in a lot of teens, maybe even the vast majority of teens, at least in the West, where I'm coming from, of what researchers call a peer orientation for their primary attachment figure. There is a phenomenal book. I think every person should read it if you think you want to be a parent one day or if you are a parent one day. It is called Hold On to Your Kids. We're going to put a link in the description to the book. But the 2 doctors who wrote this book talk about how parents have stopped mattering as much as they need to matter in their adolescence life. For a number of different reasons. But one of them is that teenagers spend a lot of time around other teenagers, right? So naturally speaking, teens are starting to branch out of their of the nest of they're not wanting necessarily their parents' influence as much. They're wanting their peers. They're wanting to be around their peers. They're wanting their peers to have influence in their life. All that starts to matter more. All of that is totally normal. All of it is totally normal. But there has been this trend for decades now of teens not having the primary attachment bond with their parents either anymore or ever, right? If they never had it, okay, sure. But if they did have it as a kid, but then it transitions away from their parents don't have the influence that they need to have over their teenager's life. And instead of the parent being the primary attachment figure, their peers become the primary attachment figure. Have you ever seen in a teen or heard stories of a teen who, like, when the parent grounds them from their phone, the teen just loses their mind? They like behave like they're a toddler, like screaming and crying and throwing things. I mean, like massive catastrophic fits around not being able to have their phone or not being able to go out with their friends or whatever. Well, if you think about what that fit looks like, that fit looks like a child, a baby or a toddler being pulled away from their mom, right? They're like when a baby is their primary attachment figure is their mom and the baby's pulled away from their mom, they're not allowed to be with them anymore. They freak out because they feel in danger. Their primary attachment figure is gone now. And there's this sense of like not being tethered. And it's very unsettling for the human person. Teenagers also have that experience of not being tethered. But if the teen has shifted their primary attachment figure to their peers instead of their parents, then when the parent tries to step in and pull access from the peers, the teenager responds like they're untethered because their primary attachment figure is gone now. Most people think that that is normal for adolescents. And maybe from a like quantitative perspective, it is a normal thing that adolescents have. But that doesn't mean it's the right thing to be happening. That doesn't mean it's the normal thing to be happening. So if your teen has what these two doctors, Neufeld and Mattei, are saying in this book, Hold On to Your Kids, if they have that reaction to their peers, that means that they have shifted their primary attachment figure from parent orientation to peer orientation. And that is a significant problem, okay? So if you're thinking about if your teen should be allowed to date, but your teen has developed this peer orientation, okay? Step number 1 is work to rebuild your relationship of trust and security and safety with your teen so that your opinion carries weight for them. They trust you, they respect you, and they want your opinion, and they want you to influence the choices that they make. They come to you voluntarily to understand what to do now. And then they take your opinion into consideration when they're making their choice because you are a respected person in their life. If you have lost that with your teen, or maybe you never had it for whatever reason, you maybe never had the primary attachment bond with your child. There are so many reasons this could have happened. No shame, just take an honest look. Maybe that was the case. Working to develop it is critical, and that book gives you some excellent ways to do that. But okay, so let's assume that you have this primary bond with your child. Let's assume that either your child has this parent orientation or you have developed it in your teen, right? So they're going to come to you asking your opinion about what to do about dating. And what we need to think about, this leads us to the second thing. What we need to think about is, what is dating for? What is it for? And I'm just going to be totally honest with you, right? Dating is for figuring out if you want to marry the person. If you aren't trying to figure out if you want to marry the person, then you're just hanging out with your friends. Even if they're opposite sex friends, right? If you don't have any sort of physical attraction to them, you don't have any sort of sexual attachment to them, you're not really like, you would never consider marrying them in the first place, then you're just hanging out as friends. That's what distinguishes dating from every other type of relationship. So if the point of dating is to figure out if you're going to get married to a person, then if you're going to date, you ought to be ready to figure out if you want to marry the person. So if you're not ready to get married, should you be dating? The question you need to talk with your teen about and explore with your teen is, are you in a place where you think you might want to get married in the next few years? If the answer to that question is no, which it would be for, I think, the vast majority of people, because I think the vast majority of people want to either go to college or get a job or want to establish themselves in adulthood. They don't want to get married right out of high school. The vast majority of people don't want to do that. Then that begs the question, ought you to be doing the thing that prepares you to figure out if you want to get married? Now, there are a lot of implications of that because I think, well, here's why I think there are a lot of implications of that. Teenagers' bodies and hearts are turning on with puberty. Puberty is lighting up all of the different elements of sexuality in the person. That's the point of puberty, right? They transition to adulthood, but with that comes all of the sexual desires. So with all of the sexual awakening that's going on, there's going to be a natural desire to orient that sexual desire towards another person, right? That's what it's for, right? Our sexuality exists so that we can make a gift of ourselves to the other person. So all of this is turning on in the teen. Everything in them is going to say, I need to orient this toward this other person. So I need to start dating, right? That's why dating starts in adolescence, because teens become interested in dating when their sexualities turn on, right? But the reality is there is so much responsibility that comes with the call to love. This is like clear John Paul II. His book is literally called Love and Responsibility, right? The idea is if you are going to be engaging in these acts of love, there's a responsibility that comes with being able to do that, right? So when a teen is like, I'm not going to be having sex, I'm just going to be going on dates. Well, when you're in a situation where you're discerning marriage, when you're in a situation of being with another person in a romantic setting, there has to be this underlying sexual current going on because that dating is for marriage, and in marriage is when that consummation of those sexual desires take place. So whether you want to think about your child having these kind of this like sexual awakening or not, you ought to be as a parent, and you ought to be carrying that as part of this larger conversation, right, of like the role of opposite sex relationships in your teen's life. You ought to be able to have conversations with your child, your teenager, about their sexuality, about these sexual desires that are awakening, about their desire to engage in sexual intimacy with other people. Like, you ought to be having these conversations and able to have these conversations with your kid. If you can't, then you as the adult need to do some more work in your own heart. You may not have been given this knowledge. That's fine. Your parents did the best they could, hopefully, but it's your responsibility to figure out in your own heart how you can learn this stuff and get comfortable with it and engage with your teen, okay? So when you're having these conversations about should my teen be allowed to date, all of this sexual awakening needs to come into this conversation. Now, a lot of people recognize this and just like throw condoms at their kids and are like, make sure she's on birth control, right? Like, there are a lot of people who recognize it, but are shirking the responsibility of teaching their child how to use it properly, or teaching your child what authentic chastity means, right? Authentic chastity is the integration of sexuality within the person, meaning you're not controlled by your sexual desires. Our sexual desires are so intense and so strong that they can very easily control us, right? They can very easily lead the way. And God, in his wisdom, asks us to develop virtue around not letting that happen, around orienting our sexual desire around the understanding that we are created to be gift to the other. So before you're married, chastity does mean abstinence, right? But abstinence is not the definition of chastity. The definition of chastity is understanding the role of your sexuality and how that weighs in. So these have to be part of the conversations of teenagers dating, right? You have to have space for what role does sex play in your life? What role does sex play in like your goals and your future and your dreams and all this stuff? Like, we have to talk about it. So when a teenager starts to date, if they are not ready to get married in the next handful of years, they are staring down the barrel of like 4, 6, 8, 10 years of being in a relationship with someone that they have developed really intense, strong feelings for. In as much as they are capable, they feel like they love these people. And they are staring down, not being able to express the love that they have for them with the full gift of self for years. So when you think about that situation, it is no wonder that so many teens are having so much sex, because the idea of waiting so long can feel so crippling that you're like, I love you, I know I'm going to marry you anyway, we might as well just go for it. That has to play a role in your conversation with your teen of, if they're going to choose to date, how can they not engage in sexual intimacy? Because sexual intimacy, we all know, well, if you don't know, there's lots of videos on this channel that can tell you about why engaging in sexual intimacy outside of marriage does not uphold your dignity. It does not lead to your ultimate happiness. It does not lead to your ultimate fulfillment. It leads to a lot of heartbreak and devastation. So working to develop not doing that is huge, right? So also weighing into the conversation of should I let my teen date needs to be how they are going to engage their sexuality in this relationship. Another thing to consider when you're thinking about if your teen is going to date is how much growing up everyone always has to do still. I want you to think back to your own adolescence and your own college years and your own early 20s. Like, are you the same person that you were back then? Because I think the vast majority of people would say, no, they're not the same person. Like, that is a time for growth and exploration and figuring out who you are. When you let intimate relationships come into this picture, that helps form who you are as a person. Adolescents are so vulnerable because they're just trying to figure out who they are. And it can be really easy to attach your identity to the person that you're dating, the person that you're in a committed relationship with, right? It can be so easy to look at this other person as a defining figure in who you are. But you only get one adolescence. So in that state, that vulnerable state, all of these voices that are coming in and weighing in on the conversation are going to affect the trajectory of their identity development, their identity formation, their dating in the future, right? So the weight of all of that might feel kind of heavy, and that's appropriate. It should feel heavy because it is heavy. All of these things need to weigh in to whether you decide to let your teen date or not. All of this needs to weigh in. Now, one of the things that I get a lot of feedback on that people love is I give direct answers to questions. Should I let my teen date? Here, I make it a very concerted effort to not be more Catholic than the church, right? If the church has something to say about something, I trust that Jesus Christ entrusted the church with all of the wisdom and beauty and all of that allows us to be made into saints. And I trust the church because I trust Jesus. So if the church has something to say about something and I personally disagree with it, it is my policy to figure out how I'm wrong and how I can grow because I trust that the church is right. Now, what does the church say about teen dating? Well, canonically in canon law, like I just said, the law of the church, girls are allowed to get married the day after their 14th birthday, and boys are allowed to get married the day after their 16th birthday. So this is a global law. The handful of teen parents I've told this to are like, what? That's ridiculous. And that's because we're in the West. And so a lot of times you have people who are wanting to go to college and wanting to live in their 20s and wanting to maybe even live in their 30s before they get married. But this law applies not only to those people, but also to like tribes in Africa, right? Where you do get married really, really young. And how young are you allowed to do it, right? That's what the church says. Boys can get married the day after their 16th birthday. Girls can get married the day after their 14th birthday. So the church, in order to get married, you have to date in some capacity, right? Even if it's an arranged marriage and your parents are choosing it, like you have to be in the mindset of dating. So the church says that teenagers must be allowed to date. So the answer is that if you're able to get married, you should be able to date. So if you want an age for it, which I don't necessarily recommend putting a blanket age on it, but if you want an age for it, the church gave it to you. Girls at 14, boy the day after their 14th birthday, boys the day after their 16th birthday. Personally, I think that this is one of those things that every teen needs to be evaluated differently. Some 16, and I'm coming from a Western viewpoint, right? So some of my listeners who are from the East maybe have a different perspective on this, but I can only come from where I'm coming from. And I would say the vast majority of 14-year-old girls and the vast majority of 16-year-old boys that I know in the States who are in typical high school situations are not in a place to get married and provide for themselves with a job and have babies and provide for those babies. Yours might be. And if yours is, then the answer is yes, let them date and let them discern marriage. Make sure, though, that they have a parent orientation, that they know what to do with their sexual desires, they know how to not have sex with their person, and they are very mindful and intentional about the time they spend, the quality time they have with the person, being in groups, being in around you guys as the family. Make sure they know that. As a whole, if you're asking my advice, should teens be allowed to date? I would say if they are not ready to get married, and they don't think that they want to get married in the next 3 years, that it is not prudent for them to be going on dates. And while I think blatantly saying, no, you're not allowed is just a recipe for a teen to figure out how to do it, which is the nuance of adolescent parenting, I think the conversation should be around, is this a prudent decision for you? Like, let's collaborate together, teen and mom, and teen and dad, about if this is in your best interest, and together decide what we think a good age would be for this and what we think this would look like. And if you decide to let them date, what the dynamic needs to look like there. So those are all my thoughts on teen dating. I think people, because I'm I do a lot with dating, I do a lot with discerning marriage, I love all this stuff. People are shocked to find that I don't love the idea of teens dating. They are shocked to find this out. But it all comes back to, what are adolescents capable of and what is dating for? And I don't think I've said this in this video. I've said this other places, and I don't want to end this video without saying this. When you get into a committed relationship, your options are marriage or a breakup. While we as Christians, we in the church, we who love Jesus know that suffering is not something we have to avoid. And in fact, intentionally trying to avoid suffering and intentionally trying to avoid your children's suffering is actually bad for them. There's an excellent quote by Pope Benedict about this. Basically, impeding a child from suffering at all, like trying to keep them from suffering, just makes adults who don't know how to engage and love and have compassion and stuff. So like, our goal isn't to shield them from all suffering, but there should be a sense in which we are mindful of suffering that is unavoidable and suffering that is avoidable. There's some suffering that's completely unavoidable, right? You can't control if your kids get sick. You can't control what other people do to them. You can't control like how they relate to the world. You can't control. There's so much that you can't control, but can control, or not control so much as you can help them to control in their own lives what committed relationships they get into, and so what breakup suffering they are setting themselves up for. And I think if teens went into it understanding as much as they can, right? Their brains aren't even fully capable of understanding this, so we have to know that. But if they go in understanding as much as they're able to understand the implications of dating, which is breakup or marriage, and if you're not ready to get married, then you're setting yourself up for heartbreak on some capacity. And also that you only get one childhood, and when it's gone, it's gone. Like, if we can help our teens to understand this, I think that will really help inform the conversation. I hope that was helpful. I hope that was helpful to this person, but I also know that there are a lot of people out there who don't have teens yet, but who are thinking about what they would do. And sometimes it's a lot easier before you actually are in the moment to kind of help start forming your opinion on it. So those of you who don't have teens, I hope you found this helpful. Those who do have teens, if you have specific questions about your teen, please message me on Instagram at Discerning Marriage. I answer all my DMs personally, and I would love to help weigh in if it's something that you're interested in. And please leave some comments. I would love to hear how you feel about this. If you think I'm totally wrong, if you love what I said, if you wish you had the courage to implement it, whatever, I would love it. But I hope this is helpful. And until next time, stay close to the heart of Jesus and be not afraid, especially be not afraid of your teenagers or their sexual desires or the idea of teens dating. Be not afraid of any of that stuff. God loves your teens even more than you do, and he's going to equip you to parent this. So, all right, bye.